In this Warmaster video, we're going to take a look at the changes to the rules which will apply in 2022. This includes updates to the army lists. Changes to the Warmaster Revolution rule set will occur in one of two ways. Firstly, the author, Alish Navratil, will propose any changes he wishes to make to the Warmaster Compendium rule set. And these rule changes will appear on Alish's website for download. And they will also be published on the Experimental Rules forum and in the Facebook group. Anyone can access these rules for free and provide their own feedback, and that way all Warmaster players have a direct line of communication with the author himself. The second method by which the rules can be changed is via the Warmaster Rules Committee. Once per year, members of the Rules Committee will vote upon any proposed changes, either to the army lists or to the rules of the game themselves. And this is where you as a player come in. Anyone who plays Warmaster can come up with an idea that they want to implement. All they have to do is propose it via the Experimental Rules forum. The best ideas will be championed by members of the Rules Committee and submitted for the annual vote. Any proposed changes which pass the voting process will then enter the playtesting stage, which lasts 1 year. Playtesting allows the Warmaster community to assess a new rule's impact upon the game. And again, this is where you come in. As a Warmaster player, you have the opportunity to provide us with this vital data. Let us know how your games of Warmaster are affected by new rules. After a year of real gaming experience, the proposed rule changes will be subjected to a second vote. And if the new rule passes this second vote, then it is incorporated into the existing army lists or the rulebook itself. So let's take a look at the rule changes which will apply this year. Firstly, we're going to look at the changes that have been implemented by the author Alish Navratil this year. These changes have been implemented wherever possible to clarify the rules, but also incorporate some ideas that are based on feedback and real gaming experience with other players. You can download all of these rule changes for free from Alish's website. Just click on the Download tab and select the Warmaster Revolution Compendium version 1.2. This is now the most up-to-date version of the Warmaster Rules. The first update you will find is on page 12. This clarifies that once a unit is touching an enemy or is supporting a friendly unit, then they're considered to be engaged in combat. And a unit engaged in combat can't be given further orders. It's also worth noting that units that are engaged in combat in this manner cannot be targeted by enemy missile fire. So in this example, the skeleton archers cannot target either the crossbowmen or the marauders, as they are considered to be engaged in combat. However, the wolf riders are a legitimate target, as they are neither touching an enemy nor supporting a friendly unit. The next update will be found on page 22, and this simply clarifies which terrain types count as dense terrain and impose the -1 command penalty. So dense terrain includes woods, built-up areas, broken ground, and marshy ground. The next update will be found on page 28, and this clarifies how units with a 360-degree line of sight, such as light cavalry, can see, react to, and charge their enemies. Such units can see all around, so in this example the wolf riders can draw line of sight to the demon flyers even though the demon flyers are behind them. This means the wolf riders can use their initiative to react to the flyers or can shoot them in the shooting phase. However, the wolf riders cannot charge them. To declare a charge, the enemy must lie within your front 180-degree line of sight. So in other words, being able to see all around only benefits you when you wish to evade or when you wish to shoot the enemy. The next update is found on page 32, and this clarifies that infantry can only pursue enemy cavalry or chariots which are retreating from combat if the infantry charge those retreating chariots or cavalry in the flank or in the rear that round. And this nicely closes off the loophole I demonstrated in my previous video about combat pursuits. The same update is found on page 47 under the rules for pursuits and retreats from combat. And here it is further clarified that infantry which charge enemy cavalry or chariots in the flank or rear are permitted to pursue them for 1 round of combat. In addition, cavalry or chariots which are in irregular formation may also be pursued by infantry for 1 round of combat, even if they are not charged in the flank or rear. Now, both of these updates were previously optional rules, however they've now become incorporated into the main rulebook and are official. The exact same rules also now apply to non-flying units which charge flying units in the flank or rear. They can pursue the flyers for 1 round of combat only. And likewise, flyers in irregular formation can also be pursued by non-flyers for 1 round of combat, even when the enemy didn't charge their flank or rear. So essentially this update now makes cavalry, chariots and flyers a bit more survivable, as they can only be pursued by infantry for 1 round only, and only when they're charged in the flank, the rear, or if they're in irregular formation. So in this example, demon infantry have charged enemy chariots in the flank. The infantry win combat and the chariots have to retreat. Because they are in the flank of the chariots, the infantry get to pursue for 1 round of combat. After this second round, the chariots are wiped out. In this example, missile infantry charge enemy flyers in the rear. The infantry win combat and the flyers retreat. Because they charged them in the rear, the infantry are allowed to pursue the flyers for 1 round of combat. At the end of the second round, the infantry have not destroyed the flyers, so they cannot pursue them further. Instead, they will fall back. Previously, there was an exploit available where you could use infantry to pursue cavalry, chariots or flyers, provided your pursuing infantry didn't end up into front edge-to-edge contact with the retreating enemy. In this example, the ogres have line of sight and can pursue into the flank of the chariots, even though they originally charged them in the front. This move is now illegal. So with the new rules update, the ogres would not be able to pursue the chariots at all. So the letter of the rules now reflect the spirit of the rules. The next update is found on page 50, and it simply clarifies that units which retreat from combat into woods or similar terrain which would restrict visibility to 2 centimeters may still be pursued by pursuing infantry even when they have retreated more than 2 centimeters into the relevant terrain. In this example, the skeleton warriors have lost combat against the swordsmen that charged them. These skeletons remove casualties and retreat 3 centimeters into the wood. Even though visibility is restricted to 2 centimeters within the wood, the swordsmen are allowed to pursue. As we assume that the swordsmen will actively chase the skeletons rather than let them disappear within the trees. The next update is found on page 52, and this clarifies the direction a unit will take when it falls back out of combat. The first stand that is chosen to fall back must move backwards of the line where it is or was in contact with enemy units. In this example, 2 swordsmen stands are fighting 2 skeleton stands. These swordsmen win combat and destroy the skeletons. They now decide to fall back. Whichever stand is chosen to make the fallback move first, the move must be made behind the line that the stand was in contact with the skeletons. And this update prevents a rules exploit, where previously an unengaged stand could be used as the basis for the unit to fall back, resulting in the unit falling back actually closer to the enemy. The next update can be found on page 77, and it deals with the cost of magic items. Firstly, some magic banners have been given variable points costs to reflect how useful they are to different types of unit. The first change is to the battle banner, which has been reduced in cost from 50 points to 30 points. So you're now only paying 10 points per stand of one unit, which will gain +1 attack for the entirety of one combat engagement, including any pursuits and advances. Because combats are limited to 2 rounds in Warmaster Revolution, the reduced points cost for this banner makes it far more cost effective. The next change is to the banner of shielding, which now has 3 versions, although of course you're still limited to a single version of this banner per army. The first option is the superior option, which keeps its original price tag of 50 points and only applies to units which already have a 4+ armor save. They will gain a 3+ armor save until the unit loses a stand. The second option is the major option, which applies to units that already have a 5+ save. For 30 points, they will now gain a 4+ armor save until they lose a stand. And finally we have the minor option for 15 points. Units that only have a 6+ save will now get a 5+ save, and units with no save will now gain a 6+ save until they lose a stand. All in all, this is a very positive change, and it will encourage players to customise their armies by including this banner to denote an elite unit. Next we have the Banner of Fortitude, which comes in 2 varieties. Of course you can only include 1 per army. The major option applies to units that already have 4 hits and costs 50 points. The unit goes from 4 hits to 5 hits for the entirety of one combat engagement, including any rounds of pursuit and advance. The minor option applies to units that only have 3 or fewer hits. They gain 1 hit per stand, and again this lasts for the entirety of a combat engagement. Again, this is a really nice touch and should promote the use of this banner in more armies. Next is the Banner of Steadfastness, which comes in 3 varieties now. The banner will negate 1 shooting hit inflicted upon the unit after saves have been made each turn, until the unit loses a stand. The superior version has been reduced in cost to 20 points and applies to units with a 4+ save. The major version is now 15 points and applies to units with a 5+ save, whilst the minor version is only 10 points and applies to units with a 6+ save. This is now a really useful magic item at an appropriate points cost. Lastly, there is the Banner of Fortune, which has been reduced to 15 points. And it's a straight up one-time reroll for all your attack dice, hits and misses. Page 78 of the rulebook now has a reduction in points cost for 2 further magic items. Firstly, the Crown of Command has been reduced in cost from 100 to 75 points. This grants the general unmodified command 10 for his first order each turn, provided you don't roll an 11 or a 12, so it's now much more affordable. Secondly, the Helm of Dominion has been reduced in cost from 50 to 40 points. And this increases the general's command value by +1 to a maximum of 10 for the entirety of one turn. So this now makes the item a bit more attractive. On page 79 you will find 2 changes to the optional rules. Firstly, the First Order rule now actually has an effect on the game, as it has been clarified to show that it affects a character's command value instead of their non-existent leadership value. There is also a new rule added to the optional rules, and this is Artillery Line of Sight. This optional rule now states that woods, hills and built-up areas will block the line of sight for artillery which is positioned on a hill. And this prevents strange situations where artillery that is on a hill could previously ignore any other terrain which was on lower ground, even if that terrain was significantly higher than the hill itself. Page 79 also includes a change to the optional scouting rules. This clarifies that the player that wins the scouting roll may not also take the first turn. Instead, they will move second. And this is designed to reduce the negative impact that winning the scouting roll and then winning the first turn might have upon your opponent. Finally, there is also a change to the optional rules for light cavalry, which is currently found at the end of the Armies book. There is now no longer a distinction between types of light cavalry. Light cavalry is simply any cavalry unit with a 6+ armor save. Light cavalry can use their initiative to evade in any direction, but must still evade in a straight line. The big change is that there is now no restrictions on other units pursuing light cavalry. And this has been implemented as it was felt that the previous no pursuit against light cavalry rule was simply too powerful for their pricing point. Now let's have a look at the changes to the Warmaster army lists for 2022. All of these changes are available to download for free from Alish's website. Just click on the Downloads tab and select the Warmaster Revolution Armies version 1.22. This is now the most up-to-date version of the army lists and incorporates all the changes that were playtested last year and then voted upon this year. So they are now official rules. Firstly, there's a minor correction to the Araby army selector. Previously, the unit size was listed as 2 and the min-max as 0 to 1. This has now been corrected, so the Araby hero is the same as all other heroes in Warmaster armies. Next we have some minor clarifications to the Beastmen army's special rules. Ambushing units that are deployed in dense terrain must deploy the entirety of their units within the dense terrain. And this prevents an exploit where Beastman units could deploy out of the woods which they were ambushing from. And secondly, a unit of Beast Herd or Herdkin or Bestigors which is joined by a Doomball becomes subject to Bloodlust in the same way as a unit of Minotaurs. And this removes the negative special rule for the Doomball, which previously stated that only the Doomball could order the unit it had joined. Next we have some changes to the Cathay army list. It has now been granted developmental status, which means it is legal to use in tournaments, as the majority of the balance issues have been addressed. There are also a number of cosmetic changes to the army list. For example, Spearmen have been renamed as Bannermen, Ogres have been changed to Iron Guts, rocket launchers have been streamlined to be more similar to Chaos Dwarf rocket launchers, Cavalry is now 2 per 1000 points, the Celestial Dragon upgrade for a wizard now grants +1 command rather than command 8, and the Glory of Cathay spell, which affects shooting, now correctly applies to chariots, not cavalry. So if you've always wanted to play a Grand Cathay army, now's the time to provide us with our playtest evidence. You can download the Cathay army list for free from Alish's website. Simply select the Developmental tab and click on the Cathay Developmental list. Moving on to the Chaos list, Chaos characters now have the option of a chariot mount. And this brings them in line with every other army that can field units of chariots. The Dogs of War have now been given the option to replace 1 unit of crossbowmen per 1000 points with a unit of handgunners by paying the price to upgrade them, in the same manner as the Empire list. And this allows you to bring some armour-piercing firepower to your army without having to break the bank. The Dwarf army has been given the ability to brigade their units of Trollslayers together again. This removes the previous special rule which prevented more than 1 unit of Trollslayers from being included in a brigade order. The rule made no sense and was believed to have been implemented originally by someone who had a bad experience playing against dwarfs. The next change is to the Goblin army list, and that allows them to replace up to 2 units of Goblins per 1000 points with units of Squig Herd. This was a needed change as previously Squigs were a rare pick due to the large compulsory number of Goblins you have to take. The next changes are to the Nippon army list, which has also been granted developmental status. This means it's legal to use in tournaments, and we are actively seeking feedback on how the army list plays. There are also a number of cosmetic changes. Firstly, Ninja have been removed from the breakpoint calculation of the army. As previously, players could simply not deploy their ninjas from ambush, thereby denying the enemy the chance to actually kill them and take their breakpoint. Ronin can now only be ordered by a character that's within 20 centimeters. Oni are now correctly costed at 110 points a unit, in line with other heavy infantry with the same stat line. The Shrine has been reduced in cost to 30 points, and the Shugenja has been clarified to be a less powerful version of the Dwarf Runesmith, with no attacks, but still retains the ability to take a Dispel Scroll, and has a positive effect upon unstable demons within 20 centimeters. So why not break out your own Nippon army and let us know how the army plays for real? You can download the Nippon army for free from Alish's website. Simply go to the Developmental tab and select Nippon Developmental Army 2.0. The Ogre Kingdoms have received two positive changes. Firstly, Noblars are now allowed to receive a brigade order with other types of unit, so they can effectively support Ogres. Secondly, Yetis have been reduced in cost to 120 points a unit, and been given the Dwarf Ranger Pursuit rule, which means they can pursue any type of retreating enemy. These two changes give the Ogre Kingdom's army a much needed power boost, with Noblars now being able to fulfill a battlefield role of infantry support, and Yetis finally being a viable unit and adding a unique tactical advantage to an otherwise infantry heavy army. There's also a clarification on the base sizes for siege engines used in siege scenarios. Battering rams and sows should be mounted on 40mm by 60mm bases, whilst siege towers should be on 40mm by 40mm bases. The Tomb King's army list has had a minor edit and removed the Lich Priest special rule, which was effectively redundant. We know Lich Priests can cast spells as they are wizards. They don't need a special rule to tell us that. The Vampire Council list has also had a minor rules clarification, which confirms that the Vampire Lord character is essentially the same as the Skaven Grey Seer or the Tsarina for Kislev. They're a wizard but also a general. The Witch Hunter army list also has a couple of rules clarifications. Firstly, the Zealot's Hatred special rule has been confirmed to apply to Chaos armies, Demon armies, Beastmen armies, Chaos Dwarf armies and Skaven armies. And the Warhound unit upgrade option has a minor text change to bring it more in line with the Empire Skirmisher rules. So overall a minor power boost for the Witch Hunters against a couple of other armies. So now we've covered all the official rules changes that have been implemented for 2022. This means that everything we've discussed so far is tournament legal and does not require your opponent's permission to use. Simply show your opponent the most recent version of the Rules Compendium and the up-to-date version of the army lists that you intend to use. As always, any feedback that you do have about these new rules can be brought to the attention of the Rules Committee via the Experimental Rules Forum. Now let's take a look at the new ideas that the Rules Committee have come up with for the army lists and require playtesting for the coming year. You can download these new playtest rules for free from Alish's website. Simply click on the Developmental tab and select Warmaster Revolution Armies Developmental version 1.23. On the same page you can also find a handy summary of these proposed changes. Click on the Warmaster Revolution Rules Committee Updates for 2022. Now, because these proposed rule changes are in the playtesting stage, you should seek your opponent's permission before you play with them. And for tournaments, the tournament organiser will inform all players whether these rules are permitted in the tournament or not. The first playtest rule is a change to the wording of the Mists of Albion spell. This has been necessitated by another change to a different army list which we will discuss later on. The original wording of the spell also referred to the target unit receiving a -1 to hit on incoming enemy attacks, as if it were defended, but didn't clarify whether this had any effect on units which were already defended. Therefore some clarification was needed, and the Rules Committee decided to implement an entirely new wording of the spell. This new wording of the Mists of Albion spell is based upon the Shield of Thorns spell from the alternate Wood Elf list which I designed. This spell simply grants defended status to a friendly infantry unit within range, even if they're not in defendable terrain. Its intention is to allow you to advance your infantry units without having to keep them hidden in cover. Remember that a charging unit can never claim defended status, so this spell will have no effect upon a friendly unit which is charged into combat in your turn. Additionally, if the target unit is driven back by shooting, or if it pursues or retreats in combat, the spell will end. The next playtest rule is for the Beastmen army list. Units of Minotaurs are now identical to units of Dwarf Trollslayers, just without a couple of the Dwarf Trollslayers special rules. In effect, Minotaurs have lost their 6-up armor save but received a 30-point reduction in cost. This makes them a much more cost-effective option as the Fanatic unit for the Beastman list. The next playtest rule is also for the Beastman army list and applies to the Doomball character. Doomballs are limited to 1 per army. They are now a terror-causing character with 2 attacks, and any Beastman infantry unit joined by a Doomball becomes subject to Bloodlust in the same manner as Minotaurs. This makes the Doomball a very viable character choice, as they are a cheap option for terror in the army, but also impose a negative trait on friendly infantry. The next playtest rule is also for the Beastmen, and this affects Centigores. Centigores are now cavalry and will be based facing the short edge of their base. This now makes them a viable unit, and they will also gain access to the trial rules for light cavalry. At 80 points a unit, they're now identical to other types of light cavalry found in the Araby, Dogs of War, Chaos Dwarf and Kislev lists. The final playtest rule change for the Beastman list is a change to the Hunting for Gore spell. There is no longer a restriction on the type of unit you may cast this on. Happy hunting! The next playtest rule is for the Chaos Dwarf army list. Bull Centaurs have had a points reduction to 140 points, and Hobgoblins have had a points reduction to 45 points. Meanwhile, Blunderbusses have been granted the ability to stand and shoot with both of their shooting attacks. These rule changes go a long way to increasing the viability and cost effectiveness of these units. The Great Taurus character mount option has also had its profile changed from that of the Araby Djinn to that of the Empire Griffin or Orc Wyvern. Essentially, the Great Taurus has lost its 2-attack breath weapon and had a points reduction of 10 points. With these general points reductions, Chaos Dwarf generals should now be able to squeeze in a few more options into their list. The next playtest rule affects the Demons army list and applies to their instability table. Demon units that have lost 2 stands no longer suffer a -1 penalty to the instability roll if they're within 20 centimeters of a wizard character. In addition, a roll of 6 on the instability table now causes the unit to regain 1 lost stand. So in effect, the demon army is now a lot less likely to self-destruct when it starts to experience instability. The next playtest rule is for the Dogs of War, and it affects the Pikemen unit. They now gain a 5+ armor save. If you've watched my previous Dogs of War faction focus video, you will know my feelings on the effectiveness of Pikemen. In my opinion, they are in desperate need of a boost, and instead of adding more special rules, a simple boost to their armor save solves a lot of their problems. Pikemen face the short edge of their base, which means they can concentrate a lot of attacks against the enemy on a small frontage. They also count as defended if enemy cavalry or chariots charge them in the front. However, pikemen lose the ability to gain defended status in dense terrain, they cannot support other infantry, and gain very limited support from other types of infantry. They can never make supporting charges, and they have very large flanks which enemy cavalry can easily exploit. Pikemen needed something to make them a viable option, and this was my solution. Having playtested pikemen with a 5+ save over the last year, I haven't yet found them to be overpowered. Instead, they survive just long enough when the enemy charge them to hold the line until help arrives. In effect, they now play as a powerful defensive unit, and can actually counter enemy cavalry and chariots effectively. Why not try out 5+ save pikemen yourselves, and let me know what you think. The next playtest rule is for the Dwarf army. The anti-terror effect of the Anvil of Doom now lasts until the start of the Dwarf player's next turn. So in effect it does actually neutralise enemy terror causes in the enemy turn. At 50 points it's still quite an expensive option, but try it out and let us know what you think. The next update is a clarification on how the Snotling pump wagon works in the Goblin army. This simply specifies when and how a pump wagon will move, as the previous version of the rules were open to interpretation, which led to player confusion. The next playtest rule applies to the Kislev war wagon. The war wagon now no longer needs separate orders to change between column formation or lager formation. Instead, the war wagon can only enter lager formation if it moves up to 5 centimeters. Hopefully this makes the war wagon slightly easier to use for new players. The next playtest rule is for the Nippon developmental list, and this simply states that Oni and Komainu cannot take magic items as they are demon units. The next playtest rule is for the Norse army. Huskarls have been increased to 110 points per unit, which brings them up to the same pricing point as equivalent heavy infantry from other armies, such as dwarf warriors or black orcs. Ulfwerner have also lost their brigading restrictions, so may now freely brigade with other units. And hopefully these changes will encourage Norse players to try out army builds which feature something other than 8 units of Huskarls. The next playtest rule is for the Ogre kingdoms. Leadbelchers may now make both of their shooting attacks when they stand and shoot, and this effectively brings them in line with the proposed playtest changes to Chaos Dwarf blunderbusses. They now have a role in the army as a good defensive unit capable of holding ground. The next playtest rule is for the Witch Hunter army list. The Warrior Priest has now been upgraded with +1 attack in combat, for an increase in cost of 10 points. This profile better reflects the martial nature of a Warrior Priest, and also allows them to contribute something to the combat when they have to join a unit to cast a spell. The final set of playtest rules apply to the Wood Elf army. Firstly, Treekin have been increased in cost to 110 points. This corrects the oversight from the original list. Treekin's special rules are effectively points neutral, therefore their base cost should be in line with other heavy infantry, such as Black Orcs, Saurus Temple Guard and Rat Ogres. The second change to the Wood Elf list is to remove the additional free wood terrain piece. This rule is the bane of tournament organisers everywhere, and is an anomaly not found in any other Warmaster list. The third change to the Wood Elf list is the alteration of the Tree Singing spell. This is now the same as the Shield of Thorns spell I proposed in my alternate Wood Elf list. The Wood Elf Spellweavers, the Treeman character, and the Branch Wraith character will have access to this spell. Instead of moving terrain around the battlefield, this spell now grants defended status to a friendly infantry unit, even if it's in the open. And the spell is designed to encourage Wood Elf players to advance outside of defendable terrain with their infantry. In effect, they can stop hugging the trees and come out and fight. Just remember that charging units can never claim defended status, so this will have no effect on a unit which charges in your turn. All of these changes should have the net effect of making the Wood Elves play like a regular army. This now concludes my video exploring the changes to the main rules for this year, the changes to the army list for this year, and the proposals for playtesting this year. Now, as a player, please bear in mind that the rules committee are not the rules police. So if you dislike a rules change, then there's nothing to stop you and your gaming group from ignoring it and continue playing Warmaster the way you want to play it. However, if you play in tournaments or against players from other communities, then the official changes to the rules which we've covered in this video are now the most up-to-date version of the rules which you will be expected to play by. As a Warmaster player, you have just as much influence over future changes to the rules as I do, or any other person does. And that's because changes to the rules are always based on playtest evidence, not on opinion. So why not give the experimental rules for 2022 a try and post your feedback on the experimental rules forum. I will include a link below.